Thanks for joining. I'm gonna share my screen. I started this thing last year of running through the trends, the future of raw veganism and wellness. Last year was my first year doing it, and this is my second year. I like to track what's in the industry. I've been a health and wellness entrepreneur since 2010, and it's really interesting to see what the landscape is looking like, what people are into, where the country's moving, some things we need to keep in mind when it comes to public health, and just also some things that I'm noticing in my business. So we'll be talking about brain health, community, and systems. And the interesting thing is that I got into brain health specifically after reading Dr. Daniel Amen's book, The End of Mental Illness. And at the time, I was working in community development, working alongside a team that was working on alternatives to incarceration. And his book really showed me a path to abolition. At the time, we were talking about cutting down on the police force. Do we need it? Are they being used for the right situations? Or is their presence with guns and things escalating things? Also, during the pandemic, folks were scared to take walks. They were scared for their safety because they're scared of their neighbors. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And his book really connected the dots for me that we really need a brain health agenda in this country, because not only does it improve metabolic health, but it also makes the community safer and allows for public health to really take root, right? If folks are afraid to go outside because they're afraid of their neighbors, because their neighbors' brains aren't well, then they're not getting the exercise and fresh air that they need. They're not getting the nervous system regulation that they need. And so it's interesting. I had a personal awareness, but it seems like the industry is having a huge wake up call, because everywhere you're hearing more and more about brain health, dementia, and what we can do about it. Alzheimer's cases are set to double in this country. And this conversation is actually happening globally. It's not just America is talking about it. There's a lot of African countries that I see that are talking a lot about this. Any place where they're seeing that there's a rise of metabolic issue and they're pointing towards the impact on the brain. And in the wellness industry in America, we're seeing now brain health is a longevity metric, right? Lifestyle now determines cognitive aging because we have linked it to metabolic health. And because of that, there's some interesting tools and services and assessments and things that are coming up in the industry. Alongside that is this change in the raw vegan movement, where more and more folks are letting go of this perfectionism, this need to be 100% raw. Way more people talking about being high raw, which is what I've been saying, because I pretty much landed there in a comfortable place where it doesn't feel like I'm being forced to do anything. I'm actually enjoying my food. It's intuitive eating approach focused on healthy, clean eating. And so I'm seeing this really great trend in the raw space where they're letting go of this all or nothing mentality and finding that flexibility to be well with eating as much raw foods as possible. We're done with dogma. We're burnt out. The pandemic did a number on us, and it did a number on businesses as well, which is another trend that we're seeing. A lot of vegan businesses, food businesses closing down nationwide. Chicago just had 6 or 7 businesses closed down, and we had our business there. Just the food landscape is tough. During the pandemic and still after the pandemic, with the administration and all the tariffs and stuff, it is just hard to run that business. And with all of the shifts going on, it's difficult. So it's good that folks are finding a little bit more flexibility, because in order to have consistency, we need to be a little bit flexible. We are living in the environment we're living in. What can you do? Another great trend that I'm seeing is that women are really getting into strength training. Everyone has heard the message that you need a strong body in order to maintain your independence as you age and age gracefully. They've heard the message that as you build your lower body, your cerebellum gets bigger, and that's the area of the brain that's managing your ability to stand up and not topple over. Because it's especially women, like women going through menopause and they're aging, those hormonal changes can cause bone loss if they're not intentional about continuing with strength training or starting if they haven't made it a practice. We need strong muscles that keeps the body up. We need strong bones. And this stuff helps to prevent falls and fractures, which typically leads to hospitalization and then illness and all sorts of negative consequences after that. So I think women have really gotten the message on this. Strength training not only is great for aging, for the brain, but also improving insulin sensitivity, right? So we could get that blood sugar or the sugar out of the bloodstream and into the muscles to do the work it's supposed to do. And people have gotten the message, and women in particular, and this is a really great trend that I'm starting to see. We're still talking about protein, right? People are still stressed out about protein. They feel like they're not getting enough protein. We saw the USDA guidelines come down, which is so funny because I made my own version that I shared in my group program, the Brain Health Breakthrough Coaching Program. It's great that they're emphasizing whole foods, but there's a lot of things in that pyramid that is problematic. Number one. Number two, there is protein in all foods. One of the things that I heard when they did when the administration was I mean, there was a lot of laughable stuff. Honestly, I'm gonna just real talk because that's one of the great things about not running a nonprofit. I can say whatever I want to say about the government. Mayor Adams and Dr. Oz have allowed Donald Trump to really make a fool out of them. Dr. Oz literally stood up there and said alcohol's okay because it's a social lubricant, which is crazy to me. Any processed food that they basically took out because they're trying to promote whole foods, that's a social lubricant as well. People love their addictions. It was ridiculous. And the last US Surgeon General put out a report basically talking about how dangerous alcohol is. There's no safe amount. It's linked to all these cancers. It's really bad for the brain. We know that already. We have scans to show and prove that. And people have been making strides. This is like when it comes to alcohol, I had never seen, witnessed, experienced so many people actually making the change to get off alcohol. You have so many more people now that are abstaining from it. And then to have Dr. Oz come on there, which I don't know that people are taking him seriously at this point, or even what the administration is doing if they're taking them seriously, because it's quite laughable. But it's unfortunate that we've made such progress and now they're saying all this. But I digress. The protein situation. So they said when they came out with these new USDA food guidelines, someone said, I can't remember, I think it was RFK Jr., that there's a war on protein and we need to stop the war on protein. I was surprised to hear that because people have been so concerned about protein for forever. Anyway, we have the literature, the scientific literature that shows all foods have protein. You can't get away from it. The only way you can get away from it is if you don't eat, right? And so if you are under eating, if you are malnourished, which is not a thing happening in this country, there may be some cases of folks with anorexia, but now you're talking about an eating disorder, right? So there's a lot of nutrient deficiencies going on. But if you are eating enough, meaning the amount of energy that your body is using up every day, you are not going to not have protein, right? Also, though, with that, we do lose some nutrients due to stress, right? We lose some things and that are very beneficial to the body. And one of that is protein, right? We feel like we're not satiated and we don't have enough when we're under high stress. The high cortisol basically sends our hunger and satiety hormones off balance, and we feel like we need to eat more. We're just not satisfied. So this is a very real thing because folks are really stressed out right now. Mental unwellness is pretty high at the moment because we are still recovering as a global community from the pandemic shutdowns and all of the stressors that have come out of that. Health impacts to us personally, to family members, to financial impacts to our businesses, our jobs. This current administration has financially impacted many communities, has physically and health-wise impacted many communities, is causing a lot of stress for a lot of people, psychologically impacting a lot of communities. I think there's not one person that hasn't been touched. And so with that, I just wanted to have on here where you can get your protein, right? It is available in all foods. Definitely eat more, but make sure it's nutrient dense. But the stress you're feeling, the hunger you're feeling is coming from a very real place. 2025, there was a lot of conversations happening amongst coaches, like nutrition coaches, and dietitians about how slow business was and how people did not really want to work on healthy eating at all because it was just so stressful. They wanted to just relax as much as possible and go to the comfort eats, right? They weren't trying to fix or improve anything because stress was so high. People were burnt out, they're tired, they're exhausted. This is a real thing. And I think alongside the other trend of folks relaxing on this 100% raw, we're seeing this in the industry that people are just trying to find a sweet spot that can work for them, that's not going to add to the stress that society and life is adding right now. One of the ways people are alleviating this stress is they're getting offline because online has been a source of a lot of stress for folks. The news coming down. And I saw it, like even in my business, typically every time Trump campaigns and then gets in office, I am personally physically affected in my body and I see it impacts my business and it's impacting the people that I serve. I see it in real time and I'm reading about it on the blogs, from the news outlets. People are being affected and the news is really stressful. So folks are just trying to disconnect as much as possible. And if you notice, the wealthy, they're trying to be offline as much as possible. They're keeping their kids away from devices and social media. So the new flex right now is not being connected, right? Not being online, not being in front of screens. There's this thing now called the fourth space. I don't know if you've heard about it, but the first space is your home environment, right? At home or school. And then the second space is, no, I'm sorry. The first space is home. The second space is like school or work. The third space is like anywhere you could be where there's people around, but you don't really have to pull too much energy to interact with folks. So like the gym, the library, a coffee shop, a hair salon, that's considered a third space. But now there's this new thing that folks are talking about, which is the fourth space, where online communities are actually meeting in person to get offline, take a break from being connected and the stress that comes with these devices and being on all the time. And so retreats, folks really want retreats. They're looking for retreats, traveling, doing stuff in real life together. I'm even like, I work remote for the most part online, and I have a global client base. I have clients in Europe and in America, but I'm also meeting people in person locally and have tried to balance the two since I've started with my food eatery when I was in Chicago. And now I have this space in College Park that I'm able to meet folks for coaching sessions. But I think this is really where folks are headed just for their mental health and well-being. They want face-to-face interaction. And this is where even all the conversations around AI and all the negativity that's coming around AI, there's some great use cases for AI that folks are not talking about enough, especially when it comes to elder care, when especially looking through the lens of brain health, right? What keeps the brain youthful and young? It's interaction, it's talking, it's thinking through problems, learning new things. And having a bot or AI companion that can be with seniors to just communicate with them is a really great use case. So while a lot of people, especially young folks, wealthy folks, they're trying to move offline, there's a great use case for AI that is happening, that's blossoming. So I know there's a lot of negativity online about AI. And of course, we need to be conscious consumers. We need to be active when it comes to policy and actually know how data is being used and all of that good stuff. But we don't want to, we like advancements. I mean, yeah, we need to advance as a society. So there's some positive use cases. Some great stuff that's coming up, speaking about AI, is tech, right? We knew wearables were on the scene. They've been on the scene for a long time. But the great thing happening with wearables right now is that there are brain health wearables actually tracking prefrontal cortex activity to help you focus better and focus more. I've talked a lot about Amen clinics and their SPECT scans where you can see blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, which is the front area of the brain that is like the CEO of your brain, right? It's doing the planning, it's managing follow through, thinking through consequences, things of that nature. It's managing focus and all of that. Now there are wearables where you can actually see blood flow activity in that area of the brain and train it to be stronger and to improve your focus and attention. And I'm talking about wearables like Mendy, Muse, Neuronic. There's some really interesting things out there right now. It's not cheap, of course, but it's cool that this is basically the trend that we're starting to see because the industry is seeing brain health really is the longevity metric. And folks aren't really interested. And I noticed in my community too, when I started talking about longevity, folks weren't really into it that much compared to some other communities, which makes sense. If you have a lot of resources, you want to live a really long time. If you have less, that whole thing just seems a little bit daunting. However, I see that the industry is moving more to talk to really more of the quality of life aspect versus the length of time. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to optimize for when we utilize nutrition and lifestyle, is really optimizing our quality of life. But the data on these wearables are really helpful. You could basically track everything. I was thinking last night, like, for all the issues that I see clients have with setting new habits and like turning new like health goals into habits, there is a piece of technology for that. We've talked about in my program in the group this smart water bottle that basically, if you're not drinking enough, it pings your phone. So it's literally making a noise to let you know, hey, drink more water, right? Which is definitely an upgrade from the bottle that I used to talk about, which would have the lines and the motivational sayings on it, but it's nothing loud like talking to you. Whereas this thing now is a Wi-Fi communication. Hey, you need to drink more water. Then you have things that will put you to sleep. You can do EMDR without going to an actual therapist, utilizing like these sound things. They have all sorts of technology things now. The Oura Ring, there's so much you can do with the Oura Ring now. It's tracking menstruation and hormone levels and all sorts of stuff, which is really helpful. Now, with that though, with this attention to technology, I'm also seeing that folks are using tech wrong. And the big one is CGMs. And this probably has a lot to do with this whole keto craze going on right now, because CGMs are really great and useful for folks who are type 1 diabetic. But for folks who are not, what I've noticed in people is that they get a lot of anxiety around the numbers, and the numbers don't really mean much, right? Every time you eat food, and I have a couple blogs about this on rawfoodmealplanner.com. Anytime you eat food, regardless of what it is, you are going to have a spike. And that's because obviously, if you're consuming any type of sugar, regardless of the source, which it could be from broccoli, insulin is going to, you're going to have a glucose spike, and insulin is going to be ushered in to move that sugar into wherever it needs to go. If you are consuming protein, the body, if it doesn't have enough sugars, because it prefers sugars, it will turn the protein into sugar. And again, glucose goes up, insulin is being called for. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You're going to have a spike. And obviously, if you are consuming too much saturated fat, this is going to cause some insulin resistance. And so you're going to have a high sugar numbers, high insulin response, right? So what I'm saying is every time you eat food, there will be a spike. And this is too much granular tracking for most of us. Unless you have type 1 diabetes, there's no need for a CGM, right? You go to your annual physical or whatever, check with your doctor, and he's checking your hemoglobin A1C. If that, because that is really tracking your blood sugar regulation over a longer period of time, which is a more helpful and useful metric, because this signals metabolic issues, which can cause all sorts of chronic disease and mental health disturbances. And that we can reverse out of with diet and lifestyle. But being hooked up to a CGM, this is really a waste of time, waste of money, waste of anxiety, and not helpful if you are not a type 1 diabetic. For a type 1 diabetic, it could be life-saving. We're also seeing a continuation of quick fix culture, right? With, of course, GLP-1s, they're doing well, right? They're not having any issues. But even folks who don't have obesity are using GLP-1s, and they're microdosing on it. And these are healthy people without any kind of excess fat that you can look and see on them, right? They are fit, functional, healthy looking people. And yet they're microdosing GLP-1s. Why are they doing this? I have a full long blog where I go into the details of this on rawfoodmealplanner.com. But basically, what does GLP-1s do? The natural GLP-1s are basically fiber-rich food sources, right? And when you eat a whole food vegan diet, you naturally put yourself into insulin sensitivity, you lower inflammation, you regulate your satiety and hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin. All of this stuff, GLP-1 injections, when they microdose, is basically doing the same thing that raw foods does to the body, the GLP-1 microdosing. That's why these people are going to it. And in my mind, it's like, why do a daily injection when you can just make some dietary changes? That's the question. That's the big question. And of course, there are risks to doing this. First of all, it's off label. It's an off label use for GLP-1s, typically coming from compounding facilities, which comes with a lot of risk. And I go into all that detail on the blog. And then on top of that, there's this new thing, well, which is not that new because we've talked about it years ago on the podcast, on the Raw Food Health Empowerment podcast, about this CRISPR technology where they're able to do DNA editing. Now they're able to use CRISPR to cure sickle cell, which they have done in one young man, which is awesome. Love that. They've also found a use case for high cholesterol. I wrote a whole long blog about this as well. You can head on over to rawfoodmealplanner.com if you want all the details. But basically, you get one IV, and this solution goes in and acts like scissors to your DNA. It cuts out a couple, I think they're proteins for cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol that's being created in the liver. So basically turns off cholesterol production and storage. And we don't know what will happen to these people in the future, like 10 years down the line. So there's a lot of risk involved with this. But ultimately, for folks that have high cholesterol, what I've seen in my practice just by making some dietary choices, is that folks are able to get their cholesterol under control. I love that CRISPR is being used for things like sickle cell because this is a disease that is very debilitating. And there's nothing that you can do, as far as I'm aware, nutrition wise and lifestyle wise, that will make it go into remission. But when it comes to cholesterol, I've seen a different thing, at least in my business. In the literature, they're saying some folks are having a hard time, but I just highly doubt that they've even tried going 100% plant exclusive, trying raw foods. And this is where I feel like research really can use some augmentation but these folks, they're putting money into trying to sell something. The CRISPR technology is not free. It's like $1 million a person, right? So it's not even widely available to the public right now. Same thing with GLP-1s. The GLP-1 manufacturers, they're making a killing globally. So they're not really in the business of doing research to show that their thing is just as good or less efficacious than making some dietary choices to go in high raw, for example. They're not gonna spend money to do that. And I would love to see if there's any financiers who are really into folks that financially support organizations like the Physicians Committee or some of these other nutrition nonprofits to actually pour some money into, or maybe get some of their rich, wealthy friends to pour some money into doing research to compare some of this stuff to a high raw vegan lifestyle or 100% raw vegan lifestyle. And let's see, because this stuff doesn't come without risk. And I think if we in the medical world, if you really want to do no harm, you will lay out all the options. You will be like, this is a quick fix solution, which quick fix too, like how fast is it to lower inflammation, reverse out of obesity and type 2 diabetes and clear up brain fog and get your cholesterol under control with a high raw vegan diet? How quick can that happen in comparison to these drugs? Apparently, I don't know, because the CRISPR technology, that's just clipping DNA, but the risk is so great, right? I know that my folks, they're getting results pretty quickly, but in comparison to a GLP-1 and CRISPR technology, it would be great to see what the literature has to say about that if people are willing to pour money into that. And then towards the end of last year, there was some really crazy things going on. Like Instacart, like before I get to Instacart, we've noticed in 2025 that there's been a lot of inflation. Like we talked about when I mentioned what's going on with the food businesses, especially vegan food businesses, the cost for them has just, it's been unbearable apparently. And so a lot of them are closing down. And just for everyday consumers, the cost of food, and not just food stuff, but even toothpaste and other things, packages are getting smaller and prices are getting higher. So we're experiencing inflation. But on top of that, Instacart decided to just up and do some dynamic pricing. The same thing that you would see when you're trying to buy a flight out, right? Where you're looking at a flight and you're seeing a different price than someone else. And I've had that experience here in my house on the same IP address where I'm looking at flights and I'm seeing higher prices than my husband looking at flights. But Instacart was basically doing this for grocery stores. And there was a third party review of their practices that basically broke the story that folks buying the exact same thing at the exact same time for at the exact same store on Instacart were paying different prices and how much it was costing people over time. And so folks were talking about it on the news. I think even Today Show did a special on it or a segment on it. And there was a lot of uproar about that. And so now Instacart has said that they have stopped doing that. But what we still see in the market are these, I forget now what they're called, but they're basically like these price labels that are digital. There's a name for it that I'm blanking on right now, but they're digital and you can see them change in real time. So Walmart has it, and I don't think it's like every store, right? But some stores have it, and I know Walmart is one of them where they're able to adjust prices. And so I think now we really need to be talking about how ethical this is. With the cost of living having gone up so much, and now you're talking about something that everybody needs. Like you're saying, the government's saying there's been a war on protein, right? If that is true, and you want to make protein more available and accessible, then the food itself needs to be more affordable, right? Instead of having all this dynamic pricing going on for something that's a basic need for people. So this, we've already been dealing with health inequities in this country, these huge chasms of folks dealing with food insecurity, especially in 2025 with some of the things that the administration did in the first 100 days, right? The jobs he went after, industries he's gone after, people struggling to get jobs, looking for jobs for months, right? On top of all of the tariffs and everything in the inflation, and now we're having to deal with these dynamic pricing situation going on for food. It feels icky, and it doesn't even seem in alignment with public health at all. I would love to hear your commentary on it. I don't know if you've noticed it or heard about it, but yeah, it's disgusting. I know we live in a capitalistic society, but some things just need to be just not done. Like this would be one of those. So, to wrap up, this is basically the landscape of where we are and where folks are going. I want to highlight what actually matters going forward. Particularly, we are in 2026, we are in a high stress, high tech, high cost environment. And we're living in a time of unprecedented stress, unprecedented technology, and unprecedented shortcuts. Just a lot going on, advancements, and we want to disconnect because it's just so stressful this time. A lot of this stuff is not necessarily making us fundamentally healthier, right? With the GLP-1 microdosing and CRISPR technology being used for cholesterol, the one thing that doesn't happen in these cases is real health, because you fix one thing, which may be like the brain fog or the inflammation, but you actually don't get to the root of the problem. You're still adding fuel to the fire, and this intervention of a GLP-1 or a DNA modification, which you don't even know what happens to your body and to your lineage with that type of intervention, is only solving this one issue and doesn't get to the root of the problem. So these people are not necessarily getting healthier. That's what we're living in: high stress, high tech, lots of interventions, and yet the root health is not necessarily being addressed, right? Folks are not getting healthier. And so, if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's this, right? Brain health is no longer optional, but it also cannot be outsourced. We've moved away from rigid perfectionism in wellness and in the raw food space, which is a great thing. High raw, flexible, strength focused living is more realistic and more sustainable. Women lifting weights, people reconnecting in real life, these are all positive shifts. But the tension is that because we're living under chronic stress, stress is high, the body needs more nourishment, more food, basically, right? Some folks would say more protein, but ultimately it's more food because there's protein in all things. We just need more sustenance. We also need more stability, right? Not extreme. So we don't want to add to the stress with more regimented rules, because stress disrupts hormones, appetite, blood sugar, and decision making, right? It messes with the whole capacity for you to live your life and live it well, how you show up in your home and community. And that's why so many people struggle to eat well during hard seasons. And we're in a hard season right now. And probably the next 3 years will be a hard season for many of us. Technology is trying to respond to this, right? With all of what we talked about. Some of it's very impressive. Like, I am not anti CRISPR technology, which I think I made clear the first time we talked about it years ago. Even though at that time, I think there was a book we were discussing about how folks would basically be able to curate the type of child that they have. But and there's some ethical things around that, right? If you know that you may have a child that's going to come up with a disability that's going to be maybe cost prohibitive, do you utilize this or not? I don't know that financially we're there where folks are making those choices right now at the doctor's office because it's so expensive still right now. But it's just something to think about as the technology advances and it becomes more and more available. And trying it out in these different use cases is really interesting. But for cholesterol, I just don't see how it helps, really, to be quite honest. And then the rising food costs and pricing manipulation, and people want to eat clean, but they're being pushed into harder and harder choices. So really, it's calling for all of us to, one, have grace with ourselves, have grace with our neighbors, our family members, our friends. I know a lot of folks, especially my clients, they want their family members to eat cleaner, and this is great. But we also need to understand the dynamics at play today. Today, it is harder for people to make change just because the stress is so heavy. And I think like the first thing to tackle really is alleviating that stress, right? That's the real work ahead. It's not necessarily perfection in diet or spending all this money on devices because people are not doing that right now. They're being very conscious about how they're spending money because money is pretty tight in this moment for folks. But I think everyone's really trying to build resiliency to get through this time. They still want to be informed, right? They're still curious about what's going on in their bodies. And we also need systems that support a healthy community. And we don't really have that as people are running rampant with food pricing. There needs to be focused attention on that, just accessibility to healthy food, which has been a conversation for a long time, even before the pandemic, but even more so now. And so ultimately, that's where brain health, high raw eating done well, strength, real life connections, and advocacy for food access all meet, which is just a culmination of basically the work that I've been doing over almost 20 years now. And so, yeah, this is where we are. These are the trends. Thank you for tuning in and sticking it out with me. For those of you who are watching the replay, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Like, what are your thoughts about what's going on and some of the things that I've mentioned here? And yeah, I look for, and also what more you would love to learn about as we progress in 2026. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. And with that, take care.